I was standing on my porch just after sunrise when the sound hit me like a punch to the chest, sharp metal snapping. Then tires chewing through gravel where they had no right to be. Dust lifted into the air, and through it I saw her again. The same silver luxury SUV. The same straight-backed confidence. And my ranch gate hanging open, broken like it had never meant a thing. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and she ran the Red Willow Estates HOA like it was her personal kingdom. To her, my gate was an inconvenience, a shortcut, something in the way of her community vision. To me, it was the only legal access to land my family had owned since 1978, land that existed long before her subdivision and her clipboard ever did. She didn't live on my property. She didn't own my road. She didn't even ask. She just kept using the gate, smashing locks, ignoring signs, and flashing HOA letters like they were shields against the law. What unsettled me most wasn't the damage. It was the look in her eyes. Absolute certainty that confidence and paperwork could erase fences, deeds, and history. What Karen didn't realize was that I had already started documenting everything. And the law was very clear about one thing. That gate was not hers. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I live just outside the small town of Dry Creek, Wyoming, on a narrow stretch of ranch land that bends along the edge of a newer subdivision called Red Willow Estates. My family bought this property in 1978, back when the nearest neighbor was a mile away and the road was nothing more than packed dirt and habit. The subdivision came decades later. Fancier homes, manicured lawns, entry signs with stone pillars, but none of that ever changed one basic fact: my land was never part of their HOA, not on paper, not in law, not in reality. At first, the trouble barely registered as trouble at all. One morning I found my gate unlocked when I knew I had latched it the night before. Another day there were fresh tire tracks cutting through the gravel. I figured it was someone confused, maybe a delivery driver, maybe a new homeowner who trusted their GPS too much. I fixed the lock. I reset the hinges. I put up a polite sign that said private property, no through access. I even waved at a couple of people who turned around halfway down the road. I wanted to believe it was innocent. That belief lasted until the lock started breaking, not bent, not forced open by accident, snapped. Clean metal failure, the kind that doesn't happen unless someone hits it with speed and intention. That's when I installed cameras and reinforced the posts. I still didn't call anyone. I still thought, let's handle this like adults. Then Karen showed up. She parked right in front of the gate like she owned the place and stepped out wearing a fitted blazer with the Red Willow Estates logo stitched neatly on the chest. Clipboard tucked under her arm. Smile practiced, confident, and completely unearned. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask permission. She pointed at the gate and told me, flatly, that the road was now considered community access. I remember asking her to repeat herself, because I honestly thought I misheard. She said the HOA had maps, official ones, maps that showed the road as shared infrastructure. When I asked to see them, she tilted her head slightly and smiled like I was being naive. "The county already has them," she said. "You'll want to comply before this turns into a problem." That was the first lie. I didn't know it yet, but I felt it. Something about the way she said it, like she was reciting a script she'd used before, set my nerves on edge. Within days, the letters started arriving. Formal envelopes, HOA letterhead, phrases like obstruction of community access and non-compliant barrier. They warned me about daily fines. They accused me of interfering with emergency services. One letter even suggested that continued resistance could result in legal action. Every word assumed authority they did not have. Every sentence treated my land like it was theirs by default. Still, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was confused. So I did what anyone with common sense would do. I drove to the county records office. I pulled my deed first. Same document I had seen 100 times. Clear description. Recorded easement for access and utilities. Then I asked for subdivision plats tied to Red Willow Estates. The clerk handed me a newer map, filed years after the subdivision went up. And that's where my stomach dropped. The easement was gone. The strip of land that had always been marked as private access was now labeled community reserve. No explanation. No amendment tied to my deed. No signature from me, because I had never agreed to anything. It was as if someone had simply erased it and hoped no one would notice. I asked the clerk if that was normal. She shrugged and said maps get updated all the time. Developers file revisions. Things change, but deeds do not change without consent. I went home and pulled out my original survey, the older plats, the ones recorded decades earlier. The line was there, clear as day. My access, my road, my gate. The only way in and out of my property. When Karen drove through the gate again the next morning, I didn't confront her. I watched from the porch as her SUV snapped the lock and rolled past like nothing stood in her way. The camera caught everything. The impact. The dust. The moment she didn't even slow down. That's when confusion turned into resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't neighborly confusion or sloppy paperwork. This was someone testing how much they could take if they acted confident enough. And I had a feeling that if I didn't stop it now, they wouldn't stop at the gate. I still tried to handle it calmly. Against my better judgment, I believed that once the facts were in front of them, reason would win. I sent an email to the HOA board. Not an angry one. Not a threat, just the truth. I attached a copy of my deed, the recorded easement, and certified survey maps showing the access road exactly where it had always been. I asked for a meeting so we could clear things up face to face, like adults. Karen replied the next morning. One sentence. Our legal team has confirmed the access is communal. No explanation, no counter documents, no request for discussion. Just a declaration delivered with the confidence of someone who had already decided how this was going to end. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with confusion anymore. I was dealing with a strategy. After that email, the behavior changed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was aggressive. Karen stopped pretending the gate was an inconvenience and started treating it like a challenge. She began driving through it deliberately, hitting it with speed, as if breaking it proved something. No slowing down, no hesitation. One morning, the trail camera caught it clean, her SUV's bumper striking the lock dead center, metal snapping, the gate swinging open as dust rolled behind her. She never even looked back. I called the sheriff's office and explained everything. The broken locks, the trespassing, the video footage, the fake map. The response was calm, polite, and useless. It sounds like a civil matter. I would hear that phrase again and again. Every time I did, the HOA seemed to grow bolder. Within days, laminated notices appeared on my fence. They claimed I was obstructing emergency access, that my gate posed a safety hazard, that my refusal to comply was putting residents at risk. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter when fear did the work for them. Then the emails started going out to the neighborhood. Karen framed me as uncooperative, difficult. A landowner refusing to work with the community. She implied that ambulances might be delayed because of me. She never said it outright, but she didn't have to. The implication was enough to turn heads and raise eyebrows. Neighbors I had waved to for years stopped making eye contact. Still, I tried one more time. I sent another email, this one firmer but still respectful. I asked for proof. I asked to see the maps their legal team relied on. I asked how a recorded easement could disappear without my consent. The response never came. Instead, another lock was broken. That was the day I stopped trying to reason with them. I realized something important standing there with the broken metal in my hands. Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She was testing limits, seeing how much damage she could do before someone pushed back. And every time the authorities stepped aside and called it civil, she took another step forward. So I changed tactics. I stopped calling. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending myself to people who had already chosen a side. I started documenting. Every email from the HOA went into a folder. Every letter, every notice, every threat, I saved screenshots, I downloaded PDFs, I logged dates and times. When a lock broke, I photographed the damage from every angle. When tire tracks crossed my land, I measured them and matched them to the footage. I added a notebook to the desk in my office. Every entry was simple: date, time, what happened, who was involved. No emotion, just facts. I installed additional cameras. I adjusted angles. I made sure nothing happened on that gate without a record. If Karen wanted to play authority games, I would let the paper trail speak louder than she ever could. The HOA didn't notice the shift at first. They kept pushing. Another warning letter arrived, this one hinting at fines. Another email accused me of refusing mediation, even though they had ignored every request I made. It was gaslighting, plain and simple, and it was sloppy. And that sloppiness gave me clarity. This was no longer about access. It wasn't even about the gate. It was about control. About an HOA leader who believed confidence could replace consent and paperwork could rewrite history. I opened the folder on my computer and gave it a name: Receipts. Because, at some point, someone was going to have to explain how a private easement vanished, how a gate was repeatedly destroyed, and why an HOA that had no jurisdiction acted like it owned land it never bought. And when that moment came, I wanted every answer ready before the question was even asked. The real turning point didn't come from another broken lock or another threatening letter. It came the afternoon I sat across the desk from Marta Rise. Marta wasn't flashy, no dramatic pauses, no raised voice. She had the calm presence of someone who had seen every trick in the book and stopped being impressed by any of them years ago. Before private practice, she had spent time on the bench, and it showed in the way she listened more than she spoke. I laid everything out for her. The deed, the surveys, the older plats, the newer map where my easement had simply vanished, the HOA letters, the footage of Karen smashing through the gate. She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't sigh. She didn't shake her head. She didn't say this was going to be a long fight. She lined the maps up side by side, traced the boundary with her finger, and said quietly, "This isn't a dispute." I looked at her, confused. "This looks like deliberate easement erasure," she continued. "Someone removed a recorded access and hoped no one would challenge it." That sentence changed everything. Up until that moment, I had still been thinking in terms of conflict, a disagreement, an overreach, a loud HOA leader pushing too far. Marta reframed it instantly. This wasn't about opinions or interpretation. It was about records being altered to create leverage. And that moved the problem out of the HO drama category and into something far more serious. Her advice was blunt and simple. Stop engaging emotionally. Stop responding to their letters. You don't win this by arguing with Karen. You win it by forcing the truth into daylight. The first step was paper. We filed public records requests with the county planning office, the zoning board, and the HOA itself. We requested emails, meeting minutes, internal maps, communications with developers, and any documents referencing the strip of land they now called Community Reserve. Marta was specific, almost surgical. Keywords, names, nothing vague enough to dodge. While those requests worked their way through the system, she told me to do something that felt counterintuitive. Let them keep going, she said. People who think they're untouchable always overplay their hand. She was right. Karen didn't slow down. In fact, she accelerated. A few weeks later, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. When I stepped outside, I saw a flatbed truck parked near the gate and workers unloading equipment. Forms were being set. Wooden stakes marked straight lines across the strip of land I knew better than the back of my hand. They were pouring concrete. Not near the easement, not close to it, directly across it. I stood there watching as wet concrete filled the forms, cutting a clean, permanent line straight through my only legal access road. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't temporary. It was a statement. This wasn't about convenience anymore. It was about branding territory, about making the change physical so it felt irreversible. Once concrete goes down, people assume permission existed somewhere, even if it never did. I didn't confront the workers. I didn't call Karen. I didn't raise my voice. I documented. I recorded video from multiple angles. I photographed the stakes, the measurements, the truck logos. I logged the time the pour began and the time it ended. I noted who supervised the work. Everything went into the growing file. When I emailed Marta that evening with the footage, she called me immediately. "That slab just turned this into leverage," she said. They crossed from paper manipulation into physical interference. The next week, the records requests started coming back. Emails between HOA board members discussing the road as a shortcut long before any legal review. Messages about how residents complained about having to go around. A thread where Karen dismissed concerns about deeds and wrote, "If it's on the plat, it's ours." There was no consent, no agreement, no signature from me, just assumption and confidence. Marta moved quickly. She drafted notices demanding preservation of evidence. She prepared filings for injunctive relief. She advised me not to touch the concrete, not to block it, not to react. "Let it sit," she said. "It tells a better story this way." Meanwhile, started acting like the fight was already over. She sent out a newsletter celebrating new community improvements. She referenced the concrete structure as a beautification feature. She implied that access issues were resolved. In her mind, permanence equaled victory. What she didn't understand was that permanence cuts both ways. Concrete doesn't just sit there quietly. It becomes evidence. A fixed, measurable, undeniable act. It shows intent in a way emails never can. Standing there one evening, looking at that slab hardening across my road, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began. Clarity, because from that moment on, the question was no longer who was right. It was who would have to explain, under oath, why a private easement was erased on paper and buried under concrete without permission. And for the first time, I knew the answer wasn't going to be me. The concrete pour wasn't just aggressive. It was illegal. And the moment I understood that, everything about how I fought back changed. I didn't rush out there yelling. I didn't touch the slab. I didn't give anyone the satisfaction of a confrontation they could twist into a story about an angry landowner. Instead, I treated it the same way I'd started treating everything else, like evidence. I launched the drone the next morning and flew slow, methodical passes over the site. Wide shots to show location, tight shots to show exactly where the concrete crossed my surveyed easement. I recorded the truck numbers, the contractor logos, the license plates. I logged the start time and the end time of the work. I took still photos from ground level and marked reference points that matched the survey coordinates down to the inch. Every detail mattered now. That attention paid off faster than I expected. A few nights later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert just after midnight. I pulled up the camera feed and felt my jaw tighten. Someone was on my land with a flashlight, moving quickly and deliberately. They weren't lost. They weren't wandering. They were targeting the survey stakes. The footage was clear enough that there was no mistaking who it was. Bo Kellerv. Karen's right, handman. The same guy who followed her around at HOA meetings and handled the dirty work no one wanted their name on. The camera caught him yanking stakes out of the ground, tossing them into the bed of his truck, and checking his surroundings like he knew exactly how bad this looked. That footage ended the phrase, civil matter, for good. I sent the clip to Marta first. She didn't hesitate. Preserve it. Back it up. Do not post it yet, she said. This is intent. When I called the sheriff's office again, the tone changed. No more dismissive language. No more polite deflection. Trespass. Evidence tampering. Property interference. Suddenly the report had teeth. And that shift didn't stay quiet. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when someone powerful starts slipping. Neighbors who had avoided me for weeks started asking questions. Not accusations, questions. What was the concrete for? Why was it poured without permission? Why was an HOA employee on private land in the middle of the night? Then Donald Piercy showed up at my gate. Donald was a retired engineer who had lived in the area longer than most of Red Willow Estates had existed. He carried a rolled bundle of papers under his arm and an expression that said he'd been thinking about this for a while. He told me he'd worked on infrastructure planning back when the subdivision was first proposed. Out of habit, he'd kept copies of early blueprints. When he spread them out on my kitchen table, the easement jumped off the page, clearly marked, labeled, undeniable. This road was never communal, he said. They knew that. Those blueprints were a gift, but more importantly, they were confirmation. Karen's story wasn't just wrong. It was impossible. I shared copies with Marta, who added them to the growing file. Between the original deed, the surveys, the drone footage, the nighttime trespass, and now historic blueprints, the narrative the HOA had been pushing started collapsing under its own weight. Karen felt it. For the first time since this began, her confidence wavered. Her emails stopped for a few days. HOA notices paused. The gate stayed untouched. I could tell she was recalculating, trying to figure out how much damage had already been done and whether she could still muscle her way through it. Then she doubled down. The HOA sent out another newsletter, this one framed as reassurance. It claimed misinformation was spreading. It insisted the concrete was part of an approved improvement. It warned residents not to engage with outside narratives. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't have to be. Karen also tried a new tactic. Instead of threatening me directly, she went after perception. She suggested that I was being unreasonable, that I was resistant to progress, that I didn't understand modern community planning. It would have worked if I hadn't already built a wall of facts. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't argue online. I let the documents speak in rooms that mattered more. Marta filed notices preserving evidence. She sent formal letters to the HOA demanding explanation for the concrete placement and the nighttime interference. She requested contractor invoices and approval records tied to the slab. That's when cracks started appearing inside the board itself. A former treasurer quietly reached out, asking questions about expenses. Another board member asked why no vote had been recorded for the project. Karen's authority had always depended on momentum. Once that slowed, people started noticing how little support there was underneath. Standing at the edge of my property one evening, watching the light fade over that concrete slab, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was directing. The HOA had assumed I'd get emotional, loud, reckless. They assumed pressure would make me fold. Instead, they handed me proof piece by piece and never realized they were doing it. Karen still thought this was about who could push harder. She didn't understand yet that the fight had already moved somewhere she couldn't follow. A place ruled by records, timelines, and explanations she was not prepared to give. And once a story reaches that stage, confidence stops being an asset. It becomes a liability. The confrontation didn't come with shouting or a dramatic standoff at the gate. It came in an envelope. The HOA filed suit. They accused me of obstructing community access, interfering with shared infrastructure, and refusing reasonable accommodation. The language was polished, confident, and carefully vague. They wanted the court to force me to remove the gate, the posts, and anything else they decided was in their way. Karen clearly believed this was the endgame, that once papers were filed, I would panic, back down, or settle just to make it stop. Instead, Marta smiled. She didn't rush. She didn't call anyone in a panic. She read the filing line by line, highlighted 3 sections, and said, "Good. Now we ask the court to stop them." Rather than responding defensively, she filed for an injunction. Not a counterclaim full of emotion or accusations, but a precise request asking the court to preserve the status quo until ownership and access could be properly determined. No more entry, no more construction, no more interference. We attached everything: the deed, the original surveys, the historic blueprints Donald provided, drone footage of the concrete pour, nighttime footage of Bo Keller removing survey stakes, emails where Karen dismissed deed concerns outright. It wasn't a story. It was a timeline. The judge reviewed it quickly. The injunction was granted. That order changed the tone of everything overnight. The HOA was now legally prohibited from entering my land, altering the easement area, or touching the gate in any way until the case was resolved. For the first time since this began, the law drew a clear line, and it was not where Karen wanted it. With court approval secured, Marta gave me the green light to take the next step. Steel bollards, not improvised barriers, not something emotional or reactionary. These were professionally designed, code-compliant steel posts, installed exactly within my surveyed boundary and spaced according to regulations. Permits were pulled. Measurements double-checked. Everything was documented. They weren't aggressive. They were final. The morning they went in, I stood back and watched the crew work. Each post was set cleanly, anchored deep, and aligned perfectly along the legal edge of my easement. There was no room for interpretation, no room for argument. When Karen arrived, she didn't come quietly. Her SUV screeched to a stop at the edge of the bollards, and she got out already yelling. She waved her arms, pointed at the posts, and demanded to know who authorized this. She shouted about emergency access, community rights, and lawsuits. She had brought a lawyer with her. At first, the lawyer looked confident too. He stepped forward, started to speak, and then Marta handed him the injunction order, the permits, and the survey packet. He stopped talking. You could see the moment his posture changed, the moment he realized this wasn't a messy homeowner dispute he could bulldoze through with pressure. This was clean, documented, approved. Karen kept going for a few more seconds, her voice rising as if volume alone could bend steel. The lawyer finally leaned over and whispered something to her. She froze, mid-sentence. The color drained from her face. She demanded that the post be removed immediately. The lawyer shook his head, quietly, firmly. He pointed to the paperwork again and said something else I couldn't hear. Karen looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time since this started, I didn't see confidence. I saw calculation. They left without another word. No threats, no letters, no dramatic exit, just tires on gravel turning around because they finally had no way forward. The aftermath was immediate. HOA emails stopped, notices vanished. The gate stayed untouched. Neighbors who had been silent for weeks started waving again. some even stopping to ask questions now that the story had shifted. That afternoon, I walked the length of the Bollards slowly, running my hand along the cool steel. They weren't a victory symbol. They were a boundary made visible. Karen had believed authority came from confidence, from speaking loudly, from acting first and explaining later. She had treated the law like something flexible, something that bent toward whoever pushed hardest. But steel doesn't bend for confidence, and paperwork doesn't respond to volume. For the first time since the first lock snapped, I slept through the night knowing that when the sun came up, my gate would still be standing, not because I argued harder, but because I finally forced the truth to stand in front of someone who could enforce it. The courtroom was quiet in the way that makes every sound feel heavier than it should. Papers sliding, a chair shifting, someone clearing their throat a little too loudly. Karen sat at the opposite table in a tailored suit, hands folded, posture perfect, wearing the same composed smile she'd worn since the beginning of all this. The smile that said this was a misunderstanding, an overreaction, a simple mix-up. That was the story the HOA led with. Their attorney spoke smoothly, framing the entire conflict as confusion caused by overlapping records and outdated maps. He said the board had acted in good faith, that they genuinely believed the access road was communal, that any damage or inconvenience was accidental, unfortunate, and never intended to harm me. He used words like ambiguity and oversight. He talked about progress and community needs. Karen nodded along at all the right moments. When it was our turn, Marta stood without theatrics, no speeches, no emotional appeals. She didn't even look at Karen at first. She walked to the bench and placed a stack of documents neatly in front of the judge. "This is not confusion," she said calmly. "This is a pattern." She started with the basics. My original deed, the recorded easement, the historic subdivision blueprints showing the access clearly marked decades earlier. Then she placed the newer plat on top, the one where the easement had vanished without consent, amendment, or signature. She didn't accuse, she compared. Side by side. Then came the emails. Messages between board members discussing how inconvenient the road was. Complaints about residents wanting a shortcut. A message from Karen herself dismissing deed concerns with a single sentence. "If it's on the plat, it's ours." Marta read it aloud slowly, letting the words sit in the room. Karen's smile tightened just slightly. Next came the footage. The concrete pour across the easement. The timestamps. The contractor invoices. The nighttime video of Bo Keller removing survey stakes from my land, moving quickly, deliberately, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The HOA attorney shifted in his seat. Marta didn't stop there. She introduced financial records obtained through discovery, payments authorized by the HOA for the concrete project, routed through a limited liability company that, on paper, looked independent. Marta paused and handed up one more document. The company was tied to Karen's brother. The room changed. You could feel it, like a current moving through the benches. The judge leaned forward slightly for the first time. The HOA attorney asked for a moment to review the document. Karen's smile was gone now, replaced by something brittle and fixed. Marta explained it plainly. HOA funds approved without a recorded vote. Payments sent to a company with a family connection. Work performed on land the HOA did not own. And all of it justified by a map that contradicted recorded deeds. "This isn't an access dispute," Marta said. "It's misuse of authority, alteration of records, and self-dealing." The HOA attorney tried to recover. He suggested coincidence. He suggested poor oversight. He suggested that no harm was intended. The judge raised a hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold anyone. He simply asked a few questions. Who approved the map change? Who authorized the payments? Why there was no consent from the landowner? Why work continued after objections were raised. There were no clean answers. Silence filled the gaps instead. Finally, the judge leaned back and spoke in a measured tone that carried more weight than shouting ever could. He said the court was not prepared to accept the explanation that this was mere confusion. He said the documentation raised serious concerns about governance, financial conduct, and the integrity of the HOA's actions. Then he issued the order, a forensic audit, independent, comprehensive, covering HOA finances, approvals, contracts, and communications tied to the access road and related projects. Karen's head snapped up. That was the moment everything stopped for her. No smile, no nod, no confidence. Just a flicker of disbelief she couldn't hide fast enough. An audit wasn't something she could spin with newsletters or meetings. It wasn't something she could outtalk. It was a microscope. The judge continued, extending the injunction, reinforcing the prohibition against entering my land, and scheduling further hearings pending the audit's findings. His tone never changed. Calm, procedural, final. When the gavel came down, it didn't sound loud, but it echoed. Karen didn't look at me as we stood. She didn't say a word. Her attorney leaned in and spoke quietly, urgently, and for once she listened. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in months. Relief, yes, but also certainty. Because up until that point, Karen had always believed this was a fight she could manage, a situation she could control with confidence and pressure. The audit took that away. It shifted the question from who was right to who would have to explain their actions under oath, with numbers, records, and timelines that didn't care about titles or tone. And that was the moment Karen Whitmore stopped smiling, because she finally understood that this wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about accountability. And that was something she could not drive through. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, each one quieter than the last, but far more destructive to the people who had caused this mess in the first place. The forensic audit took months. During that time, the Red Willow Estates board went silent. Meetings were postponed. Newsletters stopped. Emails that once arrived weekly simply disappeared. When people don't know what's coming, they stop pretending everything is fine. When the results finally came back, they were worse than anyone expected. The audit confirmed what the courtroom had already hinted at. Funds had been approved without proper votes. Payments had been routed through related parties without disclosure. Contractors had been paid for work performed on land the HOA did not own, justified by documents that contradicted recorded deeds. It wasn't just sloppy governance. It was systemic. Within weeks, the county stepped in. Karen was removed from her position as board leader, effective immediately. 2 other board members resigned shortly after, claiming they had relied on information given to them and never realized how far things had gone. The HOA's legal counsel withdrew. The board was dissolved and replaced with a temporary administrator whose sole task was damage control. Red Willow Estates went from a loud, controlling HOA to a shell almost overnight. One of the first orders issued was the removal of the concrete slab. I stood at the edge of my property the morning the jackhammers arrived. The same strip of land that had once been treated like a trophy was now just a problem to be undone. The concrete cracked and broke apart in sections, hauled away piece by piece until nothing remained but bare ground and dust. No ceremony, no apology, just erasure. Next came the easement. A licensed surveyor returned to the property, this time accompanied by county officials. They walked the line slowly, checking coordinates against the original deed, the historic blueprints, and the modern survey. When they were done, the easement was certified and officially recorded again, this time with additional annotations clarifying that it predated the subdivision and was not subject to HOA jurisdiction. They placed permanent boundary markers along the access road. Steel caps set into the ground. Small plaques with official language that didn't leave room for interpretation. The line was no longer just on paper. It was visible. The neighborhood changed after that. At first, people avoided me, unsure what to say. Then one afternoon, a woman from 3 houses down stopped by with a casserole and an awkward smile. She apologized for believing the emails. Another neighbor admitted he had felt pressured to stay quiet. A few others followed. Some said nothing at all, just nodded or waved again like they used to. I didn't hold it against them. Fear spreads faster than truth, especially when it comes wrapped in official language. The HOA was restructured into a maintenance-only association with strict oversight. No authority over private land. No discretionary spending without approval. No board leader with unchecked power. The name stayed, but the teeth were gone. Karen moved out not long after. There was no announcement, no explanation. One day the house was empty. The next, a moving truck sat in the driveway. I heard later that her professional reputation took a hit as well. When paperwork tells a story this clear, it tends to follow you. I rebuilt the gate once everything settled, not taller, not more aggressive, just solid, reinforced posts, a clean lock, clear signage, and behind it, the steel bollards remained exactly where they were installed. A quiet reminder that some lines don't move once they're enforced. No one tried to use the gate again. The road stayed quiet. The cameras recorded nothing but weather and wildlife. For the first time in a long while, the land felt like mine again, not something I had to defend every morning. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the light stretched across the pasture, I walked the length of the access road and stopped at the gate. I ran my hand along the metal, not out of anger, but out of closure. This had never been about winning. It was about restoring what was already mine, and making sure it stayed that way. The HOA had believed authority came from confidence, repetition, and silence. They learned, the hard way, that authority without consent collapses the moment it's examined closely. Paper beats noise, records beat pressure. And once the truth is anchored in steel and stone, it doesn't matter who used to drive through like they owned the place. The gate stayed closed. This time, permanently. I rebuilt the gate after everything finally settled. Not bigger, not louder, just stronger, cleaner, and unquestionably legal. Reinforced posts, a solid lock, nothing flashy. The kind of gate that doesn't invite arguments because it doesn't need to. It simply stands where it belongs. What surprised me most wasn't the win. It was how quickly everything fell apart once the truth was forced into the open. For months, Karen's authority felt immovable. She spoke confidently. She sent letters. She acted first and explained later. And for a while, that worked, because most people don't challenge paperwork, and even fewer challenge confidence. But authority built on silence is fragile. HOAs like that survive on confusion, on people assuming someone else checked the details. They rely on neighbors staying quiet, on landowners giving up because it's exhausting to fight. The moment records replace rumors, that power starts to collapse. This whole experience taught me something I'll never forget. Always know your deed. Keep copies. Document everything, even when it feels petty or unnecessary. Never assume that someone speaking loudly or wearing a title knows the law better than you do. Because when it comes down to it, the law doesn't care about confidence. Steel bollards don't care who you think you are. They don't care about newsletters, meetings, or threats. They only care where the line actually is. And once that line is enforced, permanently and visibly, there's no driving through it ever again. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?